Thank you for coming and logging on. My name is Tom Yulee. I'm the Data Collection Program Chair for the Washington Statistical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to this joint WSS and DC APOR seminar. I'd like to thank Dave Kashihara and Han-Yu Sun from DC APOR for agreeing to co-sponsor this seminar today. We do some things together. The upcoming Summer Preview Review Conference, which will be happening on July 12th at BLS, and I was glad we were able to find another seminar here where we thought it might be of interest to both chapters and being able to come together. Before we get into the seminar, I would like to talk about some upcoming events that the WSS is doing. On Wednesday, June 26th, we are going to be having our Gertrude Cox Award Seminar and our annual dinner. This year's awardee is Courtney Kennedy from the Pew Research Center. She will be giving a seminar on testing for bots and other suspect data in online surveys, a multi-panel comparison. So this seminar will be at 4 p.m. at NORC in Bethesda. Afterwards, at 5:30, we will be having our annual dinner at Rock Bottom Restaurant and Brewery in Bethesda. It's about 8 blocks away from NORC. And the seminar and the dinner are open to WS members and non-members. What we'd like to be able to say is that for hopefully with people attending from both WSS and DC APOR, if you're not a member of the other chapter, please consider to do that. For WSS, we will point out you do not need to be a member of ASA to join us. You can go to our website, washstat.org, and you can join online for $10 or only $3 if you're a student. With DC APOR, they have events focusing on polling, public opinion research, and advances in survey methodology. If you're interested in joining DC APOR, please go to their dcapor.org website. Their standard memberships are $30 and student memberships are $6. While their membership fee might be a little bit higher, they already have the annual holiday party already included in that. So now we get on to today's seminar. So today's seminar is diving into the U.S. Census Bureau Planning Database and Rome application, tools for survey and census planning. It's going to be given by Kathleen Kephart and Suzanne McErdle. And I'll introduce both speakers now. So Kathleen Kephart is a researcher in the Center for Behavioral Science Methods in the Research Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. She began her career at the Census Bureau in 2009 as a mathematical statistician during the 2010 census. She has worked in the decennial evaluations and the demographic survey areas of the U.S. Census Bureau. She currently works on questionnaire design and evaluation, as well as planning database coordination and outreach. Suzanne McErdle is a team leader in the Cartographic Products and Services branch in the Geography Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. She began her career at the Bureau in 2008 as a cartographer. She leads the generalization team that produces generalized boundary files to support mapping and data dissemination. She leads the team that maintains the Census Automated Map product system, which is a batch matching system that produces large and small format maps to support various Census Bureau programs. And more recently, she has had several web map application development teams and has been leading those, including the team responsible for the Rome. So I appreciate Kathleen and Suzanne coming today to share. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thanks, Tom, for helping coordinate this and anyone else that worked to get us here. We're excited to be here today. We really appreciate you spending your lunchtime with us. So we hope that we can return the favor and send you all home with some valuable information about the work that we're doing at the Census Bureau. It may be something that may be applicable in some of your future work. Kathleen and I are here to talk about a data set called the Planning Database, and then a new web mapping application called the Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM for short. So before we dive in, I was just working a second ago, get the slide clicker. The function button, they messed this up. Let's see. Anybody? Wendy, where's Wendy? There we go. There We're on lock. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Better now, technical difficulties, than when I get to the live application demo. So before we dive right into the actual planning database and Rome, we just kind of want to set the scene and hope to give you enough background about the 2020 census really quickly and the American Community Survey, which will help set the scene for the planning database and a metric called the low response score, which lives inside of the planning database. And then we'll do a live demo of the actual mapping application and show you some things that we look forward to in our new releases of both the planning database and the Rome tool. So with that being said, the goal of the 2020 census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And if we had just been sitting in a room of Census Bureau employees at this point in the decade, everyone would have recited it with me. It's an incredibly simple goal, even though the act of doing this may not be actually simple. It is incredibly important, and we take this very seriously, and we have data and tools that are helping us reach this goal. You may have heard the phrase that the decennial census is the largest peacetime mobilization undertaken by the federal government, but to throw numbers out there for sheer scale and to just put this into perspective a little bit, by 2020, the Census Bureau is estimating that there will be more than 330 million people in about 140 million housing units. So the Census Bureau has been using the data set Kathleen's going to be highlighting for you today, the planning database, and Rome, the tool that I'll be able to walk you through a big, scary live demo for a number of 2020 census planning efforts. We've been using it to recruit and hire staff, think where do these staff need to be, what language skills do these have, as well as informing the level of field resources and staff necessary to do the work out in the field. Another quick example of how we've been identifying or how we've been using these tools is to identify hard-to-count areas using the low response score, which we'll hear about more momentarily, to identify these hard-to-count areas and identify trusted messengers that can serve as census voices to be out in the public. And these folks that we hire are called partnership specialists, and these partnership specialists also need to have the language skills that need to be out in the particular communities that they're serving. So they're using the exact tools that we'll be walking through with you today to inform their outreach and communication plans that they are executing out in the local community too. One of the other things that I wanted to point out is that since these tools are all publicly available, when partnership specialists go out and speak with different people in the local communities, they're able to leave these tools in those people's hands. So tribal, state, local officials, community groups, advocacy groups, other local partners, they can all use these tools to help lead their own efforts. The Census Bureau is lucky, and we have a lot of organizations and groups that are understanding the value of the census, and that being counted means that you're represented in our government, and it means federal dollars that can impact the local community as well. So the main reason for all of the work that we're going to be talking about today is to minimize non-response follow-up efforts. This is when somebody doesn't respond and we need to go knock on their door until they do respond. The most costly part of the decennial census, and so doing all of this work, planning and on the front end, all of this outreach and communication, we're able to do the best that we can to try to boost self-response rates to minimize the non-response follow-up activities. And so with that, I'm going to let Kathleen run away with explaining a little bit about the American Community Survey and how that feeds into the planning database, and we'll go from there.
So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the American Community Survey. Okay. So the American Community Survey, as most of you know, is the premier source of detailed population and housing information about our nation. It started in 2005. It replaced the census long form and became a critical element of the Census Bureau's re-engineered decennial program. It gathers annual instead of decennial data on a sample of the U.S. population. The sample is large enough that if we aggregate over 5 years, we can produce estimates at very small levels of geography. Because of the ACS, the 2010 census was a short form that counted all residents in the U.S. instead of the long form with all the detailed questions. And thanks also to the ACS, The 2020 census will also be a short decennial census form. All right. So the levels of geography available, and when I say available, I only mentioned block group and tract here because this is the levels of the planning database that are publicly available. The ACS estimates themselves are available at many small geographies: city, metropolitan areas, congressional districts, zip code tabulation areas, county, etc. But I'm focusing today on tracts and block groups because that's what the planning database is. So a tract is a subset of a U.S. county. There's more than 34,000 in the U.S., and they generally have a population size between 1,200 and 8,000. The optimum size is about 4,000 people. A block group is a further subdivision of a tract. There are more than 220,000 of them in the United States, and they generally have a population anywhere from 600 to 3,000 people. So you may be wondering, okay, where can I find ACS estimates? And so I've put the full ACS website. We're migrating to a new website from American Fact Finder, if you're familiar with this. And so I put the old address and the new address. And I've also put a little planning database address, and I'm going to tell you in a second why you should use the database. Okay, so why do we have a planning database? This goes back to what Suzanne said about planning field resources and creating tailored communication and partnership campaigns. Starting in 1990, we developed a hard-to-count score and an early internal planning database for planning and field. Households in each census tract were assigned a score. The higher the score, the harder to count. Field Division then used this score and the planning database to make hiring decisions and resource allocations. In 2000 and 2010, we continued to use a hard-to-count score and a planning database and made decisions with it. Additional staff across the country used the score to identify those areas that needed extra outreach, engagement, and education to respond. Starting in 2020, and starting actually after 2010, we made the planning database publicly available as a resource for anyone who's interested. And we upgraded the low response score to an ordinary least squares model prediction. It's free and publicly available to internal and external stakeholders. So what's in the planning database? I call it the greatest hits of the ACS 5-year estimates in 2010 census variables. Rather than the full ACS summary files, which have many hundreds and thousands of estimates, we have just kind of your big population variables: gender, age, education, poverty measures at the household level, language spoken in the household, relationship of the household, if it's a married household, unrelated household, etc., median income of the tract or block group. For housing unit tenure, is it rental or owned, number and percentage, number of units, buildings with different, 0 to 5, small multi-units or large multi-units in the tract, as well as some census operational variables. So if it was a mail-out, mail-back area in 2010 where we mailed a form and then they would fill it out and mail it back, or if it was update enumerate where we went out in the field and enumerated them in person. Also, if it's a bilingual area, those are areas that we targeted to send the census swim lane Spanish-English bilingual form to because they had a high percentage of Spanish speakers. All of this is available on the planning database. The biggest thing that you're not going to get on the ACS summary files is we calculate the percentage variables for each estimate, as well as their measures of margins of error, and those at the tract and block group level. The planning database is available as a comma delimited file, so you can just go to the website link I gave you earlier, download it, open it in Excel, and in under 3 minutes be playing in the data. It's also available through the Census API. As you can imagine, this has a broad scope of uses for internal and external users. It's great for identifying areas with likely low response, and we'll talk about the low response score in a little bit, stratifying small areas to design a sample collection, data collection, creating thematic maps if you're familiar with any kind of shapefile program, enhancing your reports with some simple population metrics about a small area. And in addition, with the API, you can use the data to easily build your own application if you want. So if you're still not sold, why should I use the planning database? We have these great ACS summary files, or you can create subsets in FactFinder or soon census.gov's new research tool. The problem with those is it takes 5 to 10 minutes on a high-speed FiOS line to download the full ACS summary files, and then additional processing afterwards before you can get a simple tabulation out of them. You can create easier-to-use subsets on census.gov, but you need to know what you're looking for and what's there before you do that. With the planning database, you can just download everything because it's just kind of the greatest hits, and odds are, unless you're looking for something very particular, it's in the planning database. As I said, it contains our most popular 5-year estimates. Estimates are matched to the 2010 census estimates for each tract and block group. It contains this decade's hard-to-count score, the low response score, which I'll get into in a minute. It's updated annually with the latest 5-year ACS data. And now the Rome application, which Suzanne's going to give us a really neat demo of, makes the planning database even more accessible. So here's the structure. If you were to open the file, this is what you would see. First variables, you're going to see geographic identifiers, whether it's block group on the block group file, tract on the tract. Then you're going to see your demographic, socioeconomic, and housing data variables. We like to keep the variables consistent, so the census estimate, number of males first, then the ACS estimate for the number of males for that geography, followed by the margin of error. Okay. We then put the census operational data, what the mail back, mail return rate, low response score, etc. And then we calculate the percentages and margins of errors for each geography for you, keeping the order consistent with the actual counts that were earlier in the file, percent males, ACS, etc. So this is still not enough for you. We've got some other ways to use the planning database. So let's say you're interested in an area relatively smaller area like DC. Just really quickly calculating using the latest 2013-17 5-year estimates. I looked at this profile and saw the male to female ratio is about similar. The population under 5 is pretty similar to the national average. Population that identifies as Hispanics a little lower. And population not born in the U.S. is about similar. These are all variables that you can get off the planning database. Okay. So here's an example from the Census Bureau that maybe you can take and use yourself. This is from the 2016 census test, which was in Harris County, Texas. Looking at the block group file, you estimate in the census test site we've got about 484,000 people. And these 4 metrics are typically associated with being hard to count, and all 4 of these are in the low response score model estimate. So we can say, okay, the percent of households where no one speaks English, that's our criteria, where no one over the age of 14 speaks English very well. That's a non-English speaking household, we'd say. About 3 times higher than the national average. The population of 18 to 24, also traditionally hard to count, a little less than the national average, so that's probably not the reason it's hard to count. Renter-occupied units, almost twice as many as the national average. That's probably something we need to be aware of when we're doing outreach and response. Population also has higher than the national average with less than a high school degree. Okay. All right, so as you'll remember from the previous slide, about 15% of households, no one speaks English. When you map that and look at the test site in the block groups, the dark areas have a range of up to 80% of the households where no one speaks English very well. You can see that whereas the light areas, you have some where 0% of households, everyone speaks English in the households. So you can see to target your outreach and send your interviewers where you're going to need to send your non-English speaking interviewers. All right, so what if you want to identify these areas that need support? You find the block groups that have a high percentage. So you may be wondering what language is spoken in these block groups. It's Harris County, Texas, so it's probably Spanish, but that's not always the case for a lot of the country. So here's an example where I just ranked on the block groups with the highest percentage where no one speaks English very well. And you can see, as predicted, Spanish is the predominant language spoken. I've highlighted the other in the 4th block group because I just wanted to highlight, again, really pay attention to that margin of error, which is next to your variable point estimate. Whenever it's bigger than your point estimate, absolutely don't trust it. It's not reliable. This is really a problem with block groups because, like I said, some of them can have around 300 people. So, but again, this can be really helpful if you're trying to identify areas and what language field staff you need. On the tract file, we only have a few. We have Spanish, Asian Pacific for languages identified on the block group. On the tract file, we've got hundreds of languages identified, as far as Arabic, et cetera, to help identify what kind of staff you need. Okay, so now I've talked a little bit about this low response score. What is it? It's the predicted level of census self non-response at the census tract or block group level, based on an ordinary least squares regression of about 24 metrics from the planning database upon the Census 2010 mail return rate. The values range from 0 to 100%. So if you see an LRS of 25 in a tract or block group, we're estimating that 25% of households in the census tract will not self-respond to the 2020 census. It's updated yearly using the latest ACS 5-year estimates. Okay, so here it's not a WSS talk without a regression coefficient, and here we go. Just so you can see, kind of, remember with the LRS, high is bad, so negative as the number of married family households increases, our predicted non-response decreases. Our LRS goes down, negative association. Response rate renter occupied units, as the number goes up, our predicted non-response, or LRS, goes up. So here, bear with me for those of us who are more sophisticated programmers. I'm going to give you an example of a really quick thing you can do in Excel. Just, again, click download to Excel. Here I've filtered out to Wells County, Colorado, just a few tracks that fall into that. And we can use Excel to help us locate and identify those block groups with a low response score that falls within the quartile groups. So we can kind of say, like, within the area I'm interested in, these are in the top quartile, second, third, etc. Okay. So here's the command just to get your lowest quartile. Next, first quartile, your median, third quartile. All right, so here we can kind of see that in this Wells County, Colorado, we see predicted low response score or non-response of anywhere from 8%. So that's pretty good. They're probably going to, 92% of households are going to self-respond. Great. To a high of 36%. We're predicting, over a third of households are not going to self-respond. So a few limitations of the low response score I want to get into. It only considers mail self-response mode. Remember, our independent variable is the 2010 mail return rate. We did not have internet as an option in 2010. 2020 census and most surveys will offer internet, phone, and mail. I should add that it predicts the ACS 5-year self-response rates actually quite well. So even though it's mail only, there's some evidence that it's still doing a decent job predicting response. We know that the California Health Interview Survey had luck using it to predict their response, and several other non-government surveys have had luck with it. Some census tracts have a small number of housing units in the mailback universe. If there's a lot of group quarters or it's an update enumerate where we have to count people in person, we may not produce an LRS for it, even though it's not it has a population. That population's not in the mailback universe, so we don't predict the response for it. This is especially true of Indian reservations and very rural areas. Right now, the LRS cannot be generated for Puerto Rico. The model wasn't designed to generate in Puerto Rico. It's just in the continental Alaska and Hawaii, U.S. And also, if a census tract has had a boundary change since 2010, which not many tracts have, but a handful have, we don't predict an LRS for it because its 2000 mail return rate no longer represents the same area that its ACS 5-year estimates do. And always, if the LRS is extremely high, take a closer look. Is it low population? Is there some other characteristic leading to that? There are currently not margins of error for the LRS, and that's something we're working on for future releases. But it still makes it hard to say, what's statistically significant, a high score between two tracks. What's the difference? What's statistically significantly different? The other thing that's great about the LRS is once you identify that top quartile or decile, whatever you're looking for, you can look at those 24 metrics and say, okay, what is leading to the high predicted non-response here? Is it a young mobile population, high percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds? Is it language access barrier, number of renters, etc.? That's the great thing about the LRS. It takes into account many things that lead to high non-response. In case I haven't talked about it now, Nancy Bates and Chandra Erdman wrote a great POQ paper on the score if you want to get deeper into the methodology and try and replicate it yourself. It's available for free at this website. Okay, so here's kind of a national distribution of the LRS. All the time people ask, well, what's a high LRS? We don't have a set guidance for this, but as a general rule of thumb, it's 30. That being said, it's really important to think locally. Most people who come to us, even within census, They care about a particular state, county, census regional office. They don't care about the whole country, so don't use, your distribution for the whole country. What constitutes high, the top quartile or decile for what you're interested in? Extract those tracts within that geographic area and produce a custom LRS distribution. What score is 1 or 2 standard deviations above the mean for that area? And Suzanne's going to actually show us how to do this in the realm for tract. Okay, and with that, I'm actually going to hand off to Suzanne.
Awesome. So I'm going to move the phone back down to here.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so the Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM, is a web mapping application that provides a map interface and a data table interface without anybody downloading anything. So it's available right through a simple web browser, and it's actually hosted by the Census Bureau. So I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint slides here and go right into the application. Give me 1 second. All right. So when you come into the Response Outreach Area Mapper, you're looking at a foundation map. So this is a national map of census tracts. So when we're talking about Rome, we're talking about the census tract level planning database that's available right from within here. So as we've learned, the low response score is simply the predicted male non-response rate. So what I want to do first is just pull up the legend so that we can make the really quick point that the darker the shades on the map, the higher that low response score is, and the harder that area is to count. So we can interact with this web mapping application in a number of different ways. We have pretty basic zoom tools over here in the upper left. If you're familiar with any other web mapping interface like Google Maps, Apple Maps, this should be pretty similar to interacting with the map. So you can click and drag around the map just to sort of explore particular areas. We can go back to the home so that we can get back to the lower 48. We have some preset bookmarks here for you in case you want to go out to Hawaii, Alaska, or Puerto Rico. So I'm just going to sort of focus on the contiguous U.S. for this piece. But all of those ways of interacting with this map, cool if you're just in there exploring. But a lot of folks are interested in navigating to a particular place. This is especially relevant with our partnership specialists who are out in the field interacting with particular places on the ground. So we have a search box that'll help you navigate to a particular part of this map. I do want to point out that the low response score is not calculated at a number of these different geographies. It's not calculated at the state level, not calculated at the county level, not calculated at the congressional district level. So these are simply just ways of navigating to these areas, these geographic areas on the map, and that's simply because it would need to be remodeled at those different levels of geography. It's not appropriate to aggregate those up to a higher level, even though the census tracts nest within counties, that type of thing. One of the questions that we get asked, so just putting that out there right away so nobody gets too excited that we have a low response score for a particular congressional district. All of the levels of geography are here. We can go to a particular address if you were interested in and see what the low response score and what that socioeconomic and demographic profile of that area looks like. We can just navigate to a particular state, county, an individual census tract if you're aware of the full code for that particular census tract. Something that we're calling a regional census center. So this is basically the 2020 Census Command Post that gets set up out in the regions who are responsible for a certain number of states. Most of them are bordered by states, but we have area census offices, so this is also an internal sort of field geography. We have tribal areas that we can navigate to, Alaska Native Regional Corporations, different school districts. Right now we have the 115th Congressional District boundaries in here. That's getting ready to change. We're actually going to bring up Nancy Bates to talk a little bit about what's going to be happening in the next version of the planning database in Rome. One of those things is it will be updated with the current 116th Congressional District boundaries. The state legislative districts, if somebody's interested in a particular legislation area. ZICTAs, Kathleen mentioned those earlier. Those are zip code tabulation areas, and they're basically the best spatial representation on the ground that we can get of zip codes, because zip codes are kind of a made-up type of thing. And so that's what a ZICTA is, and place. And so what I want to do now is actually navigate to a particular place and start clicking around in the map. So you guys can see what we've been doing this entire time. So I want to take us to a place called Langley Park, Maryland. So we're going to navigate right to that area. So we zoom right to that area. The place boundaries for Langley Park, Maryland, the entire extent of that place is actually highlighted in orange on the map. So I'm going to get rid of that orange highlight now that I've navigated to it, and just kind of show you some of the other nuts and bolts to the tool. So I can literally click on a particular census tract right here. It pops up really simply the county and state that we're in, the particular low response score. So here, 39% of households we're predicting will not self-respond to the 2020 census. And right within the same pop-up, we're getting a look at that planning database information that Kathleen just highlighted. So we have values here, the total population, we have the median household income, $71,000, which is actually pretty high. We have different measures of the population's age, educational attainment, race, ethnicity, Hispanic origin. We have some other metrics about language metrics in here. So we have, not just that variable that Kathleen highlighted earlier, where no one in the household speaks age 14 or no one in the household age 14 or above speaks English very well. I mean, it's kind of helpful, but we're not mind readers. We can't figure out what those particular households are speaking if we don't have the data. So we have the 7 most common languages that are actually highlighted and spelled out for you in this pop-up. We have some housing measures too, so the total housing units, occupied units, renter occupied units, family occupied units. We have a measure of mobility, so anybody over the age of 1 who moved from another residence within that last year, we have down at the bottom of this pop-up. So one of the things, I mean, this is great. I can come in here, click on a tract, see what's going on at that particular level. But there are a couple of other things that we can do since this is interactive web mapping application. So one of those things, you guys might be thinking, where is Langley Park, Maryland? I have no idea where we are right now. We can change the underlying base map. So we can actually look at satellite imagery, and we can turn on and off that low response score layer so that we can kind of get, or even change the transparency if we want to see a little bit more of that satellite image come through, but keep that low response score data on there. So we can, if we go back to a different base map, we can get some street network information, so we can see a little bit more reference information for where we are. We can zoom back out, see that we're actually to the northeast of Washington, D.C. So, I mean, that gives us a little bit of reference for where we are here. Let's zoom back in here and turn that back on and get back to this satellite imagery. And without even visiting this area on the ground, we can see that we're not in rural America right here, right? We're pretty dense housing with some industry. It looks like industrial areas built in. So we can get a lot of information because this is already pulled, the planning database, it is already pulled down and alive for you to interact with and learn more about particular places. So everything that was in this drop-down window over here is also available as a separate reference layer to turn on in the map. So I did mention that we're not able to provide you a low response score for a congressional district, but one of the helpful things is here is that we can actually turn the congressional district layers on and then use our interpretation, a visual interpretation of where something might be within a congressional district. So we highlight Maryland's congressional districts 4. We can then sort of go in and see that, all the way over here we have a hard-to-count area within that district. Back down in here in Prince George's County, there are a number of hard-to-count areas. So again, we're just using visual analysis for these types of things. But the strength in this app is actually in the data table itself. So rather than you grabbing the comma delimited planning database, this data, everything that I showed you in the pop-up, is also available down in this data table, and we can interact down here within this data table in different ways. So one of the more obvious barriers to self-response is non-English speaking households that Kathleen highlighted a little bit ago. And, you know, we just clicked on this particular tract, and I sped by that piece, but I think this value is 58% of the households have no one age 14 or above that speaks English very well. So, you know, for this particular census tract, that might be the barrier to self-response. But now that I have this interactive data table down below, we can actually issue a command, a filter, to locate other census tracts that might have non-English speaking households in them, or a high number of those. So what I want to do here, I know it's kind of difficult to see, but in the bottom left, we can see that there are 37 features in our data table. So this is 37 census tracts. These are the 37 census tracts that are within the map extent right now. We can turn off the filter by map extent button to have the entire 74,000 census tracts in the nation involved in our query. So we're basically going to be querying from the entire national data set here. So I wanted to just show you how to do something like this. So right on that data table, we have an option filter where we can say, let's show us all of the census tracts in Prince George's County, Maryland, where more than a quarter of the households speak Spanish. So I'll go ahead and do that. So just doing state, county name. So we have a number of resources available right on census.gov/Rome, which is where you would access the application. We also have a data dictionary there, so you can figure out exactly what you're querying for and what all of these different data fields are. We didn't change the names of any of the data values from the planning database, just in case people are already familiar with the planning database and want to just jump right into this without having to rename variable. It made sense to be able to do that. So I've indicated that I want all the census tracts in Prince George's County, Maryland. Now I just need to find the Spanish-speaking variable. So here we are, percent age 5 or above speak Spanish in the household. So let's say that we're more than a quarter of the households. So we issued that query, and you can maybe see, maybe not, but I'll tell you there are 14 census tracts in Prince George's County, Maryland, where that is the case. And so what I want to do now is actually select all of those census tracts from our data table, and we can see that we have just highlighted, change this back just to the regular dark space map so we can see that a little bit better. But you can see that we've just identified a pretty big pocket of Spanish-speaking households there. So if I'm a partnership specialist that's already been hired in this area with bilingual Spanish-speaking skills, I'm going to go identify Spanish-speaking organizations or groups that serve Spanish-speaking folks in this area to take the message of the census there and to help engage, encourage, and educate folks about the census in that particular area in a language that is their language. So another example that I just kind of wanted to highlight, because there's a ton of different types of barriers to self-response, and language isn't one of the only ones. In fact, if we open up that data table again, and let's just do a different example really quickly. We can identify all of the census tracts in, let's do the District of Columbia, where household median income is greater than $90,000. Bear with me here. Let's see if that results in any census tracts. So now we can actually see that 64 census tracts in DC have a median household income of greater than $90,000. And if we can interact with this data table like you would be in Excel, SAS, anything else, so we can sort our data values there, and we'll see that the highest census tracts in DC with that high median income is 31. So we can navigate, you can see it highlighted on the map, but we'll navigate right to that area. And let's, look at a little bit more in the pop-up here. So the median household income here is actually $100,000. We can see that the population 18 to 24 is about 29%, 19% Black, 54% white, 9% Hispanic, 12% Asian. We can continue going down. No one in the household age 14 or above speaks English very well. It's only 1.5%. So this is not a particular census tract where there is necessarily a language barrier. So if we keep going down to the bottom, because I know why this census tract may be. If we look at the population age 1 or above who moved from another residence within the last year, that's 39%. So 39% of the people that live in this census tract didn't live here a year ago. One of the other indicators here, 87% of the housing units are renter occupied. Those are also different types of signatures for hard-to-count areas. In areas, of high mobility and high renter occupied housing units, we would definitely want to push the internet self-response mode here. So these are just sort of some examples of ways that census is using this to kind of figure out what's going on in a particular area and what we can do to help boost self-response rates in those areas. So Kathleen mentioned that I was going to show you sort of how to use this national application on a little bit more of a local level. So I wanted to show an example of a state level. So how we can use that data table, we're going to go to the state of New Mexico because I've already done this also, and just sort of show you how we can use the data table to find the mean for a particular state, the mean LRS, and then find the hardest to count census tracts in that particular area, because what's considered hard to count across the nation might not necessarily be, New Mexico might actually want to focus on a larger set of hard to count than the national level distribution provides for. So I'm going to pull up our data table one more time, and I am going to filter, and I'm going to get rid of the filter that we've already created. And I'm just going to look for census tracts that are in the state of New Mexico. Here we go. So if we issue this query, I think it's 499 census tracts in the state of New Mexico. So if we come back over to our low response score field within the data table, we can click on that and bring up the statistic. I never say this word, and I work at a statistical organization. And I can't say cartographic products that well either, and I'm a cartographer. It's really frustrating. Okay, so we have the stats profile right here. We have the average low response score in New Mexico for a census tract is 23.7, and I'm looking at that. That's that second line from the bottom. And then we have the standard deviation handy too, so that's 4.6 for us. And so what we're sort of suggesting at the state level is if you take the average and just go up one standard deviation and above, those are the hardest to count census tracts given for a particular state. So what we can do now, 23.7 plus 4.6 is 28.3. So I'm going to go into the data filter, the table filter one more time, and I'm going to add an expression set in here. No, I'm not. I'm going to add a filter expression. So I'm just going to add one more row to my query here. And we're going to say where the low response score is at least 28.3. And actually, I'm going to come back in here and do this in 1 second because I want to make a point on the map. So give me 1 second here. So if we look at the state of New Mexico, we can see that down here in the southern area, we have a number of the darkest blue census tracts. So just to remind you, this is that have a low response score of 30 or above. You can also see that we have little pockets of super hard to count census tracts in here. Again, this map was categorized based on that national data set. So and here and here. So when we issue this tailored query just for the state of New Mexico, come back in here. Now I'm going to do it the right way, add a filter expression, and just type in the low response score is greater than 28.3. So this is just one standard deviation above the mean and beyond, at least. He's smarter than the computer. So 28.3. And when I issue this query, we will see how many census tracts meet that criteria. So that's 79 census tracts across the state of New Mexico that we would locally for the state be saying are the hardest to count. So if I start selecting those on the map, start to see those show up in different places. And you're going to see that it's not necessarily here. And we can see that it's not going to be exactly all those places that have that highest blue category. So we're basically enabling, this is a higher level of analysis for a web mapping tool, but folks who are interested in doing this, you can see that we've highlighted quite a number of census tracts that weren't necessarily in that highest national category of hardest to count. Basically, no matter why an area is hard to count, our outreach consists of installing locally trusted voices in some of these places. And I just wanted to point out one more feature of the application before I toss it over to Nancy. But we are able to add open data from other sources onto the map. So if we go back to Washington, D.C. real quick, point out that hard to count census tracts, you can see there are a number of them that are in that darkest blue category. I know that Washington, D.C. has a ton of open data on the web. We have an add data feature on this map. So I'm actually going to grab, because the Census Bureau doesn't collect data, geospatial data, about every type of establishment or identity, or establishment on the ground. But the state of D.C. D.C. actually has a number of different geospatial data layers that we can add to the map to help us figure out where are the libraries in D.C., where is a place that we might want to host an educational workshop, where are the places of worship here. We might want to speak with pastors, rabbis, about speaking to their congregations about the mission of the census. So I'm just going to turn on those two data layers here that I've been able to just find. These are hosted by D.C., and different areas have different data sources that we can access. So we're going to do libraries and places of worship. And if we go back in, the census tract that I identified earlier was right here. And so now if we're looking, you can see there's very clearly a library just in this pocket of what we're considering the hardest to count. That could be a library where we host that educational workshop. Or, maybe down here in this particular area of D.C., maybe we go visit these two places of worship to try to gain those more trusted voices than those in the community. So that's just, I think, the last example that I wanted to show. One other quick thing, just because we've been talking about how all of this data is actually publicly available, wanted to show you just the website here. So census.gov/Rome. 1 second. Got a full screen mode. So that's what the main landing page for Rome looks like, and we have a number of different. We just lost it. It's showing up on the web app. I don't know. Yeah, so we just lost the screen in the room as a result of me hitting a function button. That was not the right one at first. What our guy did, F4. Let's see. Sorry about this. Not that I know. So if you have a cell phone, a smartphone in your possession, if you go to census.gov/Rome, this app actually works on mobile devices as well, and you can just sort of see right there. This is important for this part, but once we get back to the slide.
I don't mean to invade your space.
No,
I'm kind of blind.
Do whatever you need to. I'm sorry about that. That's definitely my fault. At least it happened after the web app piece, right? If you go to census.gov/Rome, we have a number of different publicly available resources, a user guide, frequently asked questions, a number of different quick tip guides and shortcut cheat sheets for how to use Rome. We also have, I was just going to also pull up the planning database webpage, which you can get to from the slide deck. You can see that we have a number of those things available.
I don't know which
Oh, we're there. You just can't see it. So that's
Okay, I should know this.
Yay.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Wendy.
Okay. Hit enough buttons and it worked. Okay, I'm sorry.
So then we're actually going to toss it over to Nancy Bates, senior researcher over at Census, with the clicker and all, so she can finish off this before we get to questions. And I'd be happy to go back into the application at question time and do any other examples if people are interested.
Before Nancy gets up, I just want to say truth in advertising that Suzanne did all of that on my computer. This is Wendy.
Oh.
Right?
Yes.
So nothing was canned. It was all live. She did it on the fly. So no smoke and mirrors there.
So I got you. Covered.
Which one are we at?
For something right in.
All right.
New.
Terrific. So I have seen these guys do this presentation more times than I want to mention, and it never gets old. I mean, this is just, to me, this is just the coolest application, and it's got so many layers, and it's got so many applications. It's incredible. So I'm just going to bring it all home by just talking a little bit about some of the enhancements that are coming up on the next vintage. And I think we're hoping the next vintage of the PDB enrollment will be 2 weeks. Keep our fingers crossed if that's going to happen. So there's some cool things. There's tons of cool stuff in there, but there's still some more cool things that are to come. So in 2013, the ACS started asking questions about if you had Internet access and how you had Internet access, whether it was through broadband or smartphone only. So we have pulled off some of what we think are the more greatest hits of information about the percentage of tracts that have access to Internet. So that's going to be in there. We're going to have a couple of those things. We also had some requests from the National Advisory Committee, the Census National Advisory Committee. We have a severe problem with the undercount of young children in the census. And so at their request, we have pulled off and added some new variables that we hope will add to that kind of analysis and planning. So we have things like the percentage of 3 to 4-year-olds that are enrolled in school and also child poverty. So look for those in the planning database. We are also adding a variable that's never been on a planning database before or the Rome. This is actually going to be in the Rome, not in the planning database. You're probably familiar that we're going to have a huge communications campaign in 2020. It's going to be multi-million-dollar. It's going to be soup to nuts, TV, radio, print ads, digital, everything you can imagine we're going to throw at you. So for the last 2 years, we've been working with the contractors, Young and Rubicam, to come up with a really broad social marketing campaign that will reach everybody. And sort of the backbone of that campaign is what we call the audience segmentation. And this is something that advertisers do all the time whenever they're trying to sort of divide and conquer and put together their messaging. So we are going to put a variable onto the Rome, and I'll get into this in a little bit, that's going to say for any particular track you look at and click on, just like you did the pop-up that Suzanne showed, you're going to know what that audience segment is, and I'm going to walk through some examples of that. But before we do that, we are also adding in the ACS 5-year self-response rate. So Kathleen talked about the fact that we have the 2010 mail return rates at the track. She also talked about the fact we have this predicted modeling score for what we think the low response score is going to be in 2020. But in addition, we now have the ACS self-response rates. So the ACS is starting in 2013, it was internet, mail, telephone, and paper. So all of those together, we now have a metric in there that says for a particular track, what was the self-response rate to the ACS. And this may be more applicable to people who sort of work in the real world and don't work in census, because obviously the census rates have this huge environment around it. They have all this advertising going on. The ACS is much more typical, I guess, of an average survey, if you will. So if you want to get an idea of what a self-response rate might be without all the hoopla, this is a nice metric to have. And again, it also takes into account the fact that it's not just one mode. It was internet, mail, so on and so forth. So that's going to be in there, and you can see this is an illustration of D.C., and as you might expect, upper kind of the posh Palisades area in the Northwest, we have much higher response rates than we do in some of the harder-to-count areas in the Southeast and Northeast. So that's going to be in there. Never been public before, that's right. But we have a DRB number, just in case anybody's looking. It's all been approved, so I won't get in trouble with John Avad. Yes, that's right. This is the first time ever that it is going to be available, so that's kind of cool. So jumping back to this audience segmentation variable, there's a lot of applications for it, but basically it's an amalgamation of all kinds of data. We used ACS response rates. We used ACS data as inputs to the model. We used data from the Census Barriers and Attitudes Survey, which gave us some sense of sort of the psychographics about people's understanding about the opinions about the census, what they believe to be true, what they misperceive, that kind of thing. So this gets us a really nice, robust idea of what each tract looked like. And they use this, they're going to be using this for, again, media buying, message development, campaign optimization, and all kinds of things. So let me just show you an example of, again, it's not on there now, but we came up with 8 different segments. And again, these were, if you want to get into the methodology, that's going to be a link that you're going to be able to look at on the on the Rome page. That's going to show you all the 100-page report if you want to read about how we got to these. But just to make it really simple and cut to the chase, there are 8 different segments. They have kind of cool names: responsive suburbia, sparse spaces, multicultural mosaic. You can obviously tell that the ad agency came up with this. These statisticians did not. So I'm going to get into an example of one of these, of all the sort of different layers of information. But one thing to be aware of is they are really aligned in terms of their intent to respond to the census. So, for example, responsive suburbia, which is about 24% of the population, we think that around 71% of these tracts are going to self-respond. And it goes all the way down the continuum to the rural delta and urban enclaves, which is about 7% of the population. And here we only predict around 43% are going to self-respond. So let me just drill down for a second, because the idea is that you're going to be able to click on a particular tract, just like Suzanne was showing, and one of the variables that's going to be added to this is going to be this audience segmentation. So if, for example, I'm highlighting an area that was multicultural mosaic, you can then click on that link, and it's going to take you to this 3-pager that I'm going to walk you through, and you get a sense of all the sort of robust and layered information of what it means to be in this multicultural mosaic. So, for example, this particular segmentation happens to be a segment with very high concentrations of foreign-born residents. A majority of the people in the segment are usually Hispanic. We've got kind of a younger population going on. Their self-response rate is pretty low. Their internet access is below average. So all kinds of things in terms of the basic demographics. The next part of these 3 pages is going to be the more demographics. It's going to get into the mindsets. I'm not going to talk about that today, but again, that's all in the report. But again, these might be hard to count because over a third is foreign-born. We've got a lot of folks with children, so partnership specialists can use this to kind of really tailor their messaging about why the census is important. They might emphasize that it's going to be good for your kids, schools, things like that. And then lastly, which probably isn't that relative to this audience, but certainly our advertisers using this, is what is the media usage? What are the main platforms that these particular segments tend to use? What do they consume more than other? And this will help them with their placements. So that's it. I'm going to turn it over, I guess, for questions at that point, but I think these guys have done an amazing job, so they'll probably handle most of the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I do want to thank you guys. It's from your presentation, you showed a lot of census applications, but also outside of the Census Bureau with organizations designing surveys. We're also doing area samples and targeting any of the field work that they need to do. You're kind of showing easy ways of being able to download information and that even people outside the Census Bureau can have. So we'll open up for questions. So in the room, yeah.
Repeat the question once for the
audience. The microphone.
I might have missed this, but do we know when the 2019 planning database is coming out?
In the next 2 weeks, knock on wood.
I have like 3 questions, but I'll. So you have you're adding the ACS response rate. Is there any talk of trying to add the
We talked about it and the risk.
Sorry.
There's a question if there's any movement towards adding the ACS response rates broken out by, mail, internet, and mode. We talked about it. The risk of disclosure is too high at that level. We have to have just kind of all modes of self-response lumped together.
But I will say, if you go back to, I think, the second, right there, in the modeling that we did for the audience segmentation, we online response. So again, this is not necessarily ACS, it's And we did use the ACS to come up with it.
Now, can you say a little bit more about that? So my other question was their data that was like on the page, like your mindset. Where is that data coming from?
The mindset composition. In 2018, we did a national survey called the Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators. That was like a 50-question survey that just about, what's your intent to take the census? Do you think it's that, favorable, unfavorable? Are you going to encourage others to name it? And so we went in and did a factor analysis and then a cluster analysis to come up with these different mindsets. And again, they're all explained. And that was only one of the inputs in addition to what we got the response rates are going to be at the track level, and again, their motive response, there's all that stuff that came together to put together the actual multicultural mix. But certainly there's tons of papers I could use.
I have a quick question. So I might have missed this at the beginning because I was running around. So if you were, say, working at another agency like, Department of Transportation or, I don't know, one of the health agencies or something, they use this information that's in Rome, and could you share how you think they could use it? I mean, I think you could, but I'd like to hear from an expert. Thank you.
Yes. So, I mean, in terms of actually using the application itself, I mean, it's publicly available to whoever, however. As we've been talking about this for the past 2 years, the application itself, we've spoken in front of a number of different types of folks, and the uses that the things that people are actually using it for has sort of just like spawned off and been just very interesting, just since it's sort of a live GIS with that data set available. So in terms of trying to think of specific instances.
Well, so for example, let's say you were working at a health agency.
Sorry, I might even put the phone over there.
Right, so we've got the new people who are uninsured. I don't think that's on the roam, is it? It will be in the room. Okay, so let's say you're working for a health agency and you want to really zoom in on areas that have super high uninsured rates. You could absolutely do that, and that is a mapping tool if you wanted to, as Tom was saying, if you wanted to do sampling, if you actually want to do surveys of that area. I mean, I think that's one example.
Was that you can actually download a subset of the data table. So as long as your query returns less than 5,000 records, you can download that as a CSV and take it into a different type of program that you're familiar with to just sort of do some sort of analysis just on that small subset of things too.
And just as a note, Rome is only at the track level, and it doesn't contain the full variable set that's in the planning database. There are more variables, and especially more languages spoken in the set in the Rome.
What percent uninsured is it?
It is in the right now already.
So the percent uninsured is going to be added to the new PDP.
Yeah.
And it will be in Rome. So I think childhood.
Yes, we're adding age breakdowns, percent uninsured as well.
For uninsured.
Yeah. To the planning database. I don't know that you guys are doing the age breakdown.
Is currently a variable on the 2018 plan?
It's just percentage uninsured, percentage with insurance. Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you had information there, which I think you do about the number of children and the language, that would help regardless of what you were serving, if you were NORC or WSDOT or something.
I've heard of like local sheriff's departments, lawyers using it for court cases, all kinds of crazy things. Because it's publicly available to a lot of people. Okay. Other questions?
I have one more.
Okay.
Are you willing and able to give this talk or a variant of it to the FCSM Geospatial Interest Group? You can do it remotely.
Sure. When?
I'll put you on the spot. I'm sorry. I'm totally on the spot.
No, we've done different variations of this presentation for people. So yeah, no, I would especially at Geospatial, that's my people.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. They can probably say yeah, because I was thinking that, because they're we have people from Department of Transportation and National Cancer Institute and a bunch of other places. And I know they'd be, I mean, if you see a map like that, they're
excited about it.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We're going to check, Wendy's going to check to see if there was anybody online who had questions. Thanks, Wendy.
Nope, I didn't see any.
Okay.
I wanted to chat to everybody there, but I didn't see any.
Any other questions in the room? No.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Kathleen, if we give another round of applause to Kathleen and Suzanne. Thank you. Yep, and out in the hall there are flyers for DCA4 and also a flyer for the upcoming information on the WSS annual dinner and seminar, so please take those as you leave. Thanks.
Thank you very much.